recording. All right, welcome everybody to our Digital Services Forum bi-weekly call. Today we're going to talk about digital product operating models. And go ahead and get started. So if anybody's on for today for the first time, I always go over this in the beginning. Please put your name in the comments if you're on the live session. Some people will be watching this on video. If you are watching this on video, when you go back to the comments on the bottom, you'll see in the video, I'll link you to the content for these presentations. A lot of times what members take away from these calls is they're able to take this content that we're sharing and then use it internally. So again, if you're on for the first time, just post your name in the comments and where you're from, and we'd like to welcome you to the group. If you do want to use our shared instance, we won't be using it today, but we often use our shared instance in demonstrations. And I give everybody admin on that instance. So there's about 125 of us on that instance. And the reason we do it there is if we show something on that instance, we know everybody can get to it and they could pull down any configurations or anything that they see on there that might be useful. That's another way that we share. Another way we share is on our community, and the community is also linked inside of your invites to this session. And you can join our community and you'll get notified when new things are on there. And that's where we put all the content that we have. So anything we have to share, whether it's code or presentations, will be linked in that community now. For those of you that have been on a while, it used to be on our Google Drive. And then also what we've been doing is taking all these recordings, and people often ask me for the recordings. Now we have them all contained in one big playlist. So that's a link to the playlist that will give you all of our videos, all of our recordings from all of our sessions, at least since the beginning of 2022. So all of those are in one spot for you. Makes it easy to get to. So the reason we brought this group together, right, was really to talk about digital transformation. That's the big buzzword that everybody's talking about these days. But how do you actually do that? What are the processes around doing that? What are the ways that we can make that done consistently? And a lot of people on here, well, everybody on here is ServiceNow customers. So how do you do that with ServiceNow? So our mission is really to enable the members to drive their digital transformations in their organizations. And a lot of the ways that we do this is by sharing work, sharing some of the presentations we have, the white papers, the code, anything we can share that'll make that journey a little bit easier for you. We like to get out in this community and bring it together. So whether it's customers presenting or partners presenting or ServiceNow employees presenting, we try to share as much of that as possible. It's the architecture team. So I'm on the architecture team, and there's 3 other people on the team that put all the content together for you guys. And then we do meet bi-weekly, and we are going to keep that up across next year. We'll jump right into today's agenda. So we're going to start out, and Dan's on for the first time. And Dan's the managing director at CC&C Europe. And Dan's going to talk through some of the problem statements around digital products. So why are the digital products here? And then he's going to talk a little bit about how things changed from digital products to digital services, and then talk a little bit about digital product management and jump around based on how you guys got them, right, as we allow comments and things like that. I'm going to come in and give the ServiceNow perspective on that and where we are with ServiceNow, talk about the CMDB linkages, give some examples. Actually, one example I'm going to really focus on. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about getting started, the people that you need, the processes, and the technology. And then at the end, we'll save a little bit of time just to talk about our content for our next sessions. And any questions before we get started? All right, with that, I think I'm going to pass sharing over to Dan, our guest speaker for today. And Dan, you should be able to see share at the top of your screen and just take it from me. If you say new share and share screen.
I am sharing, I think.
It's almost, there it is. All right, all yours, Dan.
Okay. Hi and welcome. My name is Dan Warfield, and I'm not a ServiceNow customer or partner or member, but I actually do a lot of work with ServiceNow in the architecture space and different kinds of training. And I've been pretty closely connected with some of the people in that space for a few years. So you don't really have conceptual partners, you only have implementation partners and things like that. So I'm not any of those. What I'm going to talk about today is digital products and digital product management and particularly in the context of the IT for IT standard, which is a standard of the Open Group. I've been deeply involved in that for, gosh, about 6 or 7 years now, since I was first introduced to it when I was working at Walmart in Bentonville. And I was introduced to it by Mark Bodman, who some of you may know, who was not working for ServiceNow then, but he has been for the last few years and recently focused a lot on CSDM. So Mark and I have been doing this IT for IT stuff for a while. One of the things that I was asked to bring into the frame is that the structure of the different products that are available on the ServiceNow platform and of the platform itself, and the structure of the way the CSDM is evolving is closely tied to IT for IT. They're not exactly the same, but they are definitely half siblings, if you like. And that's partly because we're all on the same mission, which is about moving from project-based IT management and IT investment in particular to product-based models. And I believe, and I'll tell you a little bit about why, that is essential if you want to have a scalable digital transformation. And the IT for IT standard is not the only way to do that, but it is a robust model that has been proven as a way of understanding how to manage digital products and also how to automate the digital factory. We'll talk a little bit about that. Lost my button. So this is a little bit about me, just a little bit. I left Walmart 6 years ago and went back to having a small company, which is part of a group of enterprise architecture boutique consultancies based in Sydney, with offices in London and India and Seattle. But I've worked for some big companies, as you can see in the past, both as a consumer and as a seller of big systems, and very much in the space of strategy and architecture and trying to understand how should we spend the money. And in that space, this is one of my favorite things I've learned. This is something I picked up at a Forrester conference several years ago, one of the architecture presentations, and I thought, this is fantastic. And a lot of what I want to talk about keys off of this understanding, which is that in IT, and in my experience in IT, a lot of us technical people really don't understand the business aspects of what we're doing. We do not understand the perspectives of the people who are spending the money to have the IT. And one thing I've often challenged people with who reported to me or in other situations is, can you tell me what you're doing that justifies the money that's going into your paycheck every month? If somebody's writing you a check every month, what is it that you do that is worth more than that to them? And if you can't answer the question, then this principle starts right there with your own salary, and you may be in danger. But it also applies very much to understanding how we invest in IT and how we get out of this zero-sum trap that I've seen all my life in IT management, in which the traditional way of doing IT budgeting has been, you have a great big number that is maybe hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, and often they'll give you 3% more than last year, that kind of thing. And we really don't know where the money's going exactly, but it gets allocated out to the different teams. And the stack here represents the way that this usually works. In a big company, you may have a very large IT spend, but most of that is already allocated before it gets out of the gate to depreciation, to keep the lights on, business as usual operational things, to maintenance fees that you have to pay, and also to what I call done deals on this chart. So for example, at Walmart, almost half of the IT budget when I was there was allocated to dropping new IT into new Walmart stores. And that money was not up for grabs for other stuff. That's a done deal. That's already there. So if you look at the whole IT spend and say, well, how much of that is actually left for us to fight about? It's small. It's probably less than 5%. So what that means for the CIO is that number, that allocation, is entirely treated as a cost. And the job of the CIO is to supervise the fist fight about who gets that little green stripe, and also to always look for ways to save money and spend less, because you can't have more, because everything about IT is just a money sink. It's a money pit. And that's the way most of the business people will look at it. As long as you're doing that and you can't explain what you're doing in terms of value to the business that they recognize with that metric of dollars, then you're stuck in this job where your main job is to get beat up about money all the time. And we can't actually do IT right if we take that approach. Now, I've also worked in software companies that were big IT companies that made IT things, products, and there's a very different approach there, a different model, a different way of thinking about what we're doing with creating products. And to the extent that we can move into that way of thinking in business, we will get out of the zero-sum game, and we can make the concept of the IT budget go away if we take it far enough. So the way that you do that is you productize everything you do. Almost everything that you deliver from IT can be managed as a product that has a price, that has a proposition, that has an offer for consumers, and for which you are measuring the cost in some way and getting the money back to pay for the cost of providing the product in some way. A lot of companies don't want to do that for things that they consider to be internal because, well, we're going to spend the money anyway. I think that's a fallacy, because every dollar that is being paid for anything you do in IT in your company is coming from outside. And somebody in the company who is engaged with outside is giving you some of their money to do IT. So there's never not a cash customer. And if we can stop thinking that there is a lot that we do that doesn't have a cash customer, that will help us to manage IT a lot better. So if we can create our digital product way of working, then the digital product manager is going to be just another product manager in the company competing for funding, not from the IT budget, but from the corporate budget. I've got a product idea. It's really good. I can't keep them. They fly out the door. Everybody wants them. I have a model that we all agree on whether that is actually profitable to the company. And if we do agree, then we can find more money for that, because that's a net gain to the bottom line. That's the direction you want to take. A lot of the things that support that product, traditionally, all of our keep the lights on stuff can be productized in the same way. So if I want to go out and buy an Amazon Web Server development server, that has a price. I configure it online. I say what I want. I push the button. I get a bill every month for that. You can do that internally. And anybody who says that's too hard and nobody knows how to do that, you need to just show them Amazon Web Services. It's not too hard. People do know how to do that. And when we start doing that in IT, I believe that will get us out of this trap of being a cost center where your job is just to get beat up. So that's been a big motivator for a lot of the work that I've been doing for the last few years. At the bottom, I still left a little gray bar because some of the things that we do centrally can't be turned into products, and you can't give people permission to strip everything out of the data center except the one application that forces you to have a mainframe. But as we go to cloud, that problem starts to go away too. So ultimately, as you incrementally approach this state, you should be able to move well away from the traditional way of looking at IT investment as throwing money down a hole. The possibilities that opens are endless. There are some key things that you need to do to be able to go in that direction. One thing is you have to start thinking in terms of what do I think of as income and what do I think of as cost? How do I measure it? And everyone has to agree that that's legitimate. So if I say that the service desk product has income in terms of chargeback, which may be I charge you $1 to call me. It may be I charge your entire department $20,000 a year, but it's a number that we agree, that they agree is a fair price. And we may, lots of things we can do with that product in terms of configuration, service levels, and all of that, but we have a pricing agreement. I spent several years at Walmart being asked to look after strategy for infrastructure and security and IT. And I found that especially infrastructure people have a hard time with this concept. So I'll just state it very clearly again. Price has nothing to do with cost. It doesn't matter what it costs. The price is what someone will pay. Everybody in marketing understands that perfectly. And everybody who has got a 2-for-1 offer at the grocery store has seen that in action. But one thing that people start out by doing, which I'll warn you against, is saying, well, we'll just pass the cost through to you and be transparent. If you want to be transparent, add 15%. It isn't free for you to provide the service. People often lose sight of that. You need to capture all of your costs in your financial model. I've given a few examples of the main costs that you need to think about, but the important thing is understand all the costs and allocate them correctly. Now, if you have one line in your expense budget called Unix Ops, and everybody who has a Unix thing that uses Unix compute is a customer of Unix Ops, but you have no idea how to allocate that among different products and services, then that's part of your journey, is to figure that out. But it can be figured out. Not overnight and not always, but I promise you this is a journey that people have made, and they have measured the outcome, good outcomes, and they measure it in dollars. So I'm going pretty quickly through this. You can read these slides later because we have not a lot of time and some things to cover. Please ask questions if you have questions. So as part of the concept of a digital product, the owner of the digital product is not just software, it is an entire thing that you are offering. So it has customers, it has distribution mechanisms, it has service and support, it has explicit and implicit warranties and promises to people, both in terms of things like service levels, plus, especially in some contexts where your customer is external, there are lots of implied or legally required elements to your contract with that consumer. And you have to take those into account even if they're not written down. So for example, most jurisdictions have some kind of rule that says if the product is broken, you can get your money back. You need to anticipate that as part of your planning, even though you're not making that explicit in your contract. I put a few metrics here that you might use to look at these different parts of the work that we do over the life cycle of the product. These are the kinds of things you can measure. You do planning. The product owner, product manager will do planning, and they need to have a solid financial understanding of how that product exists as a financial thing in the company. And as I mentioned before, we'll mention again, not all of the numbers have to be exactly factual. The important thing is that they're agreed. And as I mentioned to John yesterday in a meeting we had about this, that if you go far enough in IT management, at some point you come to an amazing meeting, if you're coming from the technical side, where you see a couple of big business people talking about how they're the cost of something between them. And the discussion is not about, oh, you're charging me too much for that. I don't want to pay that much because I know that those widgets are $2 and that's not, you don't talk about that. They have a meeting, they don't have time for that. They say, well, here's $10 million a year that we have to pay. How will we divide that up? And they'll sit there and say, well, I think it's fair that you take 60% and I'll take 40%. And they evaluate that based on not some cost idea, but they evaluate it based on, is it fair? And what will that do to their bottom line in their operating unit? Will they still get their bonus if they do that? Is the question they're interested in. Not how much does one more flip-flop cost. So very important to have that correct financial model and planning. When you're doing development, and I've just called this DevOps metrics because that's the real world. The DORA metrics are really good metrics to use to explain what you're doing. And these are all about understanding what's going on in your factory. There's one I put here, there are others, but that is particularly important and is a test of how well you're going to be able to scale and what your quality will be is, can you show me the traceability from your requirement to your test case? Does every test case point to a requirement? Does every requirement have a test case? Does every code module in your source library point to a requirement and vice versa? If you can't do that, you've got some problems of quality that you need to address. When we get into delivery, if we're talking about a digital factory that is really delivering digital products, it's very important that we know how to scale up and automate what we're doing. And a metric I'm suggesting for that, for example, is what percent of all of our IT fulfillment and provisioning, again, measured in dollars, not in numbers of something, what percent of that is fully automated for offering things to people, successful self-service consumption, and automated fulfillment? That's a kind of a target you can put for yourself. Again, all of these things are incremental. You don't have to turn the light on all of a sudden. You can turn it up. It just keeps getting better. One thing people care about, the other thing I put into delivery metrics is money wasted on software licenses that you're not using, and angry software vendors who discover that you are using software licenses that you don't actually own. And if you carefully manage how you do the fulfillment and how you deal with the consumption of your service, that problem really ought to go away, just gone. And it's not gone in most places yet. Finally, in operation and support, if we're thinking about the digital product over its life cycle, we want to measure things like how many of our, if we're successful in pushing a digital product in instead of just a bunch of compute platforms and disk drives and things, then our CMDB should be populated with discoverable products. What percentage of the CIs in your CMDB actually can be easily recognized and are packaged as, oh, that's the general ledger system? When you start being able to do that, not just for stuff you bought, because you can buy services for that, but for things you built, things you configured.
Hey, Dan, I got a question here. Is the difference on these metrics that you're showing, Mitch was saying, can you talk about differentiating between a product and a service in terms for differences and interdependencies and maybe even roles? The teams, he says the terms and roles often get conflated, e.g. product owner versus product manager versus service owner or service manager.
I am going to talk about that a little bit later, but I will say this, that in the IT for IT forum, in the current new release of IT for IT, we call the central thing that we're managing the digital product portfolio. In the previous release, we called it the service portfolio. What we actually meant by that was exactly the same. And we have a problem with these kinds of things where we have overloaded terms. So do we want to say it's an application or a service or a product? All of them are sort of correct, all of them are wrong, and all of them already mean other things. So a better approach to say what's the difference, I think, to understand what we're presenting here is to try to understand what we're talking about that we've given this label, and draw your own conclusions about that. Generally, the way that we think about it in the IT for IT space is a digital product provides business value that is delivered as a service. That's one way to talk about it. And I think that may be fairly consistent with the CSDM viewpoint. The thing about product owners and product managers, service owners, that the issue there for me is that the digital product is a business thing. It's not a technology thing. So if you say, I'm a product owner or a product manager, and what you actually are is the manager of a team of software developers, and that's what you do, then you're probably not the product manager, and you probably don't have one. And that's a debate that in the whole IT industry, that's unclear. So there's an entire world of websites and blogs out there about being a product manager that are entirely about managing software teams. And there's a whole other universe of things about being a product manager that are not actually about IT necessarily at all. They're about how do I manage a product. So I've got a new idea and I want to take it to some kind of market and sell it to some people I can define. And it's going to cost something to deliver, and there will be some kind of a price that people will be willing to pay. It will cost something to build. There will be all of those considerations are generic product management considerations, and whether your product is digital or not is just a detail, or has been. But now everything is digital. I got an email from a car dealer on my way to the office saying, your coolant is low. Would you like to bring it in and have us take a look? So my car sent a message to the factory, to this provider. That's a digital product. My car is a digital product. It has software in it that's running all the time. It's updated over the internet. It communicates back with the Mercedes-Benz company and talks to them about my car. There are 3 times more lines of code in that car than there are in this computer that I'm using. If Windows 11 is a digital product, so is a Mercedes. And that's something we need to get our heads around if we want to talk about this stuff. But we will talk more. I think that will become clearer as we get a little bit deeper into this. I am rushing because I want to give John some time to talk too. So when we talk about metrics and measuring and things like that, I found this slide in a current Gartner piece that's out on the internet, so you didn't have to pay for it to see this, but this perfectly illustrates the point of what we mean about metrics that can be measured in dollars. So I've got, in this example, there is some kind of a software system or IT system that supports the loan organization in the bank. The business outcome that the bank is interested in is profitability of the loan portfolio. And you can deconstruct that and decompose that into things that go down the stack until you get to sort of low-level things that are still recognizable to that loan manager. Unscheduled outage of the loan application, well, they're interested in that. They are not interested in technology operational metrics. They don't care. So if that's the only thing you're measuring, and the business people are beating you up all the time saying, why am I paying you anything? That's part of the reason. Mm-hmm. Another point on this slide that I want to mention because it stands out in my experience is the number of people who, in big companies, agree the service level agreement based on the deal that they're able to make with some second level support company. And they say, well, I've got this much money. I'm a cost center, so it's all the money I've got to hire a second level support company to do that. And so how much SLA can I buy for that? And that becomes the published service level for that. I've seen that. And I asked somebody who was in charge of quite a few mission, critical things. I said, tell me about the process you use with the business to come to these numbers. He said, oh, I never talked to them. You're not going to get out of the hole of being a cost center if that's your approach. Let me just show you briefly. I'm available to talk about this more in another forum, but in IT for IT, we describe the digital product in this way. So this is the structure of it. And the whole point of the digital product is to produce an outcome. So the outcome is going to be a value thing that we've described. We define the product. And that can be all kinds of things. The way that we do it is we present an offer to the consumer. Now, if the consumer is me buying a book from Amazon, then the service offer is a list of books that I might want to buy. If the consumer is another digital product that needs to consume some data that my system has on offer, then this offer might be presented in the form of an API, and a documented API in some context that makes it consumable. So there are lots of different ways to do that. Mostly we'd like to talk about the humans because we seem to do that worst. The service offer is short and explains the things about the service or the product that are visible to the consumer. But we also have to design a system that has everything that we need, all of the technology resources that are necessary to support that. And John's going to talk about how that plays out in a CSDM model. The system is described and has to be documented as part of the design of the product for it to work. And that enables the service interactions. The service interactions are also explicit, and those are the kinds of things that we can do that will result in this outcome. So understanding all of this is the job of the business side of the product ownership. You can understand all of this without knowing very much about how the technology actually works. There's another role in this space, which is to do the actual technical design to present this, but that is, those may be two skills in a team of any size. They're not going to be the same person. So that's a simple view. A slightly more complex view of the digital product instance is here, where the consumer with a human interface with some methods, and other digital products are also have different ways of interacting. And the system itself that we need to supply the product probably, almost certainly, consumes other digital products. So for example, if I have a general ledger system running on SAP, that digital product is probably the general ledger module, maybe. Modularity depends on how would you like to do it. That's an architectural issue. But pretty certainly, the SAP platform is a different digital product that is part of this picture. It's not part of this system. It supplies that system with support, just as the ServiceNow platform supplies Service Desk with the support that it needs to work. And this can get really complicated, and there are lots of different ways to structure that. So these pictures are from the new IT for IT version 3. And Mark and I wrote a paper about digital products that was published by the Open Group last year, which then became part of the new standard. And this is just to point out, I mean, one important thing that this points out is you can't manage your product portfolio on a bunch of spreadsheets and PowerPoint slides. You need a database that is set up to record this kind of information and these kinds of relationships, which John can tell you about, I think. So this is an example from the IT for IT training that we do of how this works. This is pretty simple, and this is an imaginary employee expense management system. Here it is in this orange circle. And here's Hans, who is the business owner of that system. Hans has a contract, and everything about the idea of having a product is that there's a provider and a consumer, and they have some kind of a contractual relationship. And that may be 200 pages of text written by lawyers. It may be a handshake, but there is some kind of a contract. Hans is only interested in this software, but inside this digital product system, there's a couple of services that it's not actually supplying itself. So in this example, in order to instantiate this system, I also have to instantiate this backup service, which has its couple of digital products. One is the backup server, and then there's two products there. There's two contracts. They're in the hosting service. I've got a hosting seat. I've got a thing here that has an operating system license, but that's all actually sitting on a Hyper-V server, which is another subsidiary product. And this is a simplified example of the kind of thing you need to be able to represent in the digital product world. I'm just going to jump over that slide because it takes too long. As we look at ways of dividing up the work and roles, and you asked about product manager. The product manager needs to understand the portfolio of similar things, and one of the main ways of organizing that is who's going to use it. Is it customers that are external? Is it market facing? And the way that you manage those is probably different from internal customers for a number of reasons. So the market facing one feels less competitive than the internal facing one. But if you believe that too strongly, you'll then be one of those people complaining about shadow IT all the time, because the internal facing one is only something you can relax on if there's no way for them to do it some other way. We also have what are called foundational products that are never directly consumed. They're always parts of something. And as we evolve this thinking, we've evolved it to think about, actually, there's probably a fourth kind, which is, this is Mark's box here, which he calls factory automation, which is the existence of the factory itself. Because we need a factory, we need a context in which to do the work of managing the planning, the building, the delivering, the supporting of these products. And that's what IT for IT is about. So this is the IT for IT digital factory, if you like. It has 7 value streams that describe work that we do, and it is heavy with feedback loops, and it all is ultimately focused on this digital product that is owned by a product owner, product manager. I think you can define those precisely in an organization, but generically, there is no standard definition of that, and we've tried not to define it in our standard. That becomes the source for the design, which happens during the building, which is this, and that is the source for the product release, which has to include all the information in this model, not just about, it's not just a bunch of build packages, it's everything you need to know. This is part of the DevOps way of looking at the world. If I think I've created a product release, then nobody should have to do a whole lot more work with that to create an instance of it besides push a button. If an infrastructure team has to spend 3 months figuring out how to install it, that's not interesting. As we drill into this model, what we're showing you here is a template for full automation of the life cycle. Each one of these blue boxes represents an essential function in the factory, and each one of the circles represents data that you really need to be managing, collecting, managing, and automating as much as you can. And the black lines represent system of record integration. So if I make my way around this picture, here's my requirement data. It is linked to policy data. It is linked to test cases, and it is linked to backlog items in the product, which is a different kind of backlog item than the strategic epic portfolio backlog item. Data system of record integrations are very important for the factory. If there's any point in which information flowing between two of these functions is manual, or if everybody does it in a different way, your factory will not scale. And one mistake that people make when they go down this path is they empower their agile teams or their safe teams or whatever their teams are to invent their own tool chain and invent their own ways of working. And there are some pretty clear boundaries that are understood by people who have been down that path, where you can allow people to make their own choices. For example, what language did I write the code in? That can be about your product. How do we run our CI/CD pipeline? If every team has their own way of doing that, you will not have a scalable factory. So there's a lot there to think about. Organizations that are trying to understand where they are in the journey, we can use IT for IT is really good as a template for helping people understand where are the real gaps? So in this example, I would say to you, so you've got demands coming into your IT system. Well, tell me about products that you used. Can you tell me what software you're using for that? And can you tell me who owns that? And who's the budget owner? Who's process owner? Who's the budget owner? Who has the budget for that? Is it 15 different systems? Is it email? Is it a grown-up demand management system? It makes a difference in how well you can automate these things. Is your process documented? Or is it just tribal knowledge? Or is it just an anthill and nobody knows what's going on, but somehow it happens? And is your documentation correct? And do you have any experts you can introduce me to? And what would happen if one of them went under a bus? Would you still be working? And the main thing that really interests me, and we did this at Walmart, we used this template to understand how to streamline the IT operation in Walmart. And as I interviewed every group in the IT division, it became very clear that most of them had very dim idea of where the data was coming from that they used to do whatever they did. And they often had no idea at all about who was consuming the data they created or whether the data they created was actually needed by somebody later. And the biggest takeaway from several months of that was a typical big IT organization creates all the data that you need to streamline this and automate it. And most of them throw it away after they create it for some immediate purpose, which leaves you with a CMDB full of information about servers and wires and boxes and not very much about product. So what we're trying to get to is an interlocked product factory end to end from demand to final deprecation that is actually data. And that's all I've got to say about that. I'm probably gone over my time a bit, for which I apologize. I hand it back to you, John. I'll answer any questions. Answer any questions if there's time.
Okay. I'll take you through a little bit of this and try to tie it back to what we have on the ServiceNow side. And then if there are any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. If we don't get to them today, we'll go ahead and follow up with you afterwards. All right. Thanks a lot, Dan. Really appreciate that. I want to take you through now and pick up on this part where Dan talked about. So in all these portfolios are different products. And we've talked about some of these on the previous meeting, kind of what goes into the foundational bucket, what goes into the employee bucket, and what goes into the market-facing bucket. When you look at IT for IT, Dan showed these, and this is where I'm going to actually tie in to the common service data model. So the plan, build, deliver, and run are the functions that we're supporting in order to make a product, in order to push a product through the factory. When it's in the run state, just like my car is reporting back to the factory to give it the metric it needs to improve the next car, or to say I need more metrics. So what we want to do is look at a ServiceNow process like this that we're all pretty familiar with. And I'm going to use that as an example. But before we do that, I want to kind of map, like if we look at this diagram in IT for IT, and we start to say, okay, which boxes are in the common service data model? You won't find any of them in the common service data model, because that's a model for what we're pushing through this process. The common service data model says, okay, here are the services that make up the product, and that's what we're going to plan, build, deliver, and run on. But if we look at this diagram that we've been sharing, this gives you a better idea of how ServiceNow maps their data objects to those data objects in that level 1 data model from IT for IT. So if we look at the top part of this, where we're pushing an idea through and demand, right? These are records that you can actually map one-to-one and make part of your IT for IT repository. And then as we come down into individual tasks here and epics and enhancements, these are more of the elaboration of your requirement. And as those demands come in, they get vetted against portfolios. They also get vetted against budget, right? They go through a funding loop up here. And then if we go down and we look at the bottom is where we're actually doing our build. So during our build, we have that requirement that we're pushing through and different artifacts that we collect along the way to have that change committed. And whether you're planning or building, everything is done against that digital product, right? That's the idea, is to get all your work streams that you have actually mapped to that digital product so you can calculate things like cost and effort. And then if you look at the middle chunk here, right, this is our run. So our run has our problem tickets, our incident tickets, and our change tickets. Now, if you look at this, there's one big piece missing, right? So if we go up, right, and we look at this, we have plan, build, deliver, and run. Now, deliver isn't represented on that model because we're not really delivering here. This is all the operational support for it. So if we look at a delivery, that gets much more complex because delivery goes more into this model where we're actually looking at all of our pieces in here, right? So if you go into delivery, we're looking at the beginning. Who are our people that we're delivering to? Are they citizens? Are they customers? Are they, what type of people are they? And then as we go through, there's going to be what engagement layers are we using, right? So all these things are part of that delivery piece, all the way back to the systems of records. ServiceNow has chunks in between here that can help you deliver depending on who you're delivering to and what you're delivering to them. And that's more the delivery piece. Okay, now what I want to go into next is we look today, and I always give this explanation, right? In the upper right, our organization expresses the need. So we have this capability that we need to deliver on. So we buy some applications, we build some stuff, right? We actually get software up there, whether we're building it or buying it, we get software up there. And then once we get it, we get all the pieces, we put them all together in this build domain. So how are we assembling those things that we have in that build domain? Well, in order to assemble things and run things and get them to production, those people that are building stuff, they need to be able to operate that stuff. So they need this operations team, right? And this is where they put all the pieces together. And then finally at the end, right, all the way back in the green, now our consumers can consume it because we bought the software, we configured it, or we built some pieces, we customized it, we integrated it, we operationalized it, now we're giving it back, right? So that's the general gist of what the common service data model is trying to do, is push those things through and coordinate the people. So whether you like to use these models or not, you're doing it all anyway, right? And that's what I always tell people, don't get afraid of this because it's all stuff you do already. It's probably in a bunch of emails and spreadsheets, but you are doing this somewhere. You are buying stuff, you are building stuff, you are operationalizing stuff, and then you are providing that back in some form or another back to the business. Now the idea is, right, to get better at doing that over and over again. So the Common Service Data Model 4.0, which we're using today, does focus on that. And then some of you have been watching, and I gave a resource sheet I'll give in the end of this deck, where you can go and look at some of the things that are coming in the next Common Service Data Model. But this is really where we go with version 5. And here you'll see that we're really looking at products, right? So instead of the business app, that actually becomes a product because you're buying an app from somebody or you're building an app, right, that you're going to use in the business. So that one that you're buying or building gets revved, right? It goes through this software development lifecycle and the different teams work on it. And then they give it to the ops team, and the ops team stand up systems that run that configured or built or combination of the two. They run that system for you so that consumers can then consume from those systems and get the value that they're after. So you'll see a lot of new things on this picture. And this is one that Mark shared before. So the products, if you're buying one, like let's say we buy a product, and I'm going to give you an example, actually. Let's just go into the example. So if you go ahead and you look at ways to make products. Now, I used to be a product manager, and my main events as a product manager was every quarter I had to go in front of my executives, and I had to say, this is how much money I made with my product when I sold it. This is, I made or missed my number, the reason I made or missed my number, and then what am I doing to increase the revenue on my product? How am I selling more of it? Right now, whether you're a product manager like me, or you're a product manager where you're selling VMs internally, it's kind of the same thing, because you have to get in front of those executives and say, look, we'll be able to provide more VMs from our VMware instead of going to Amazon, or we're starting to push more people over to Amazon or Microsoft, right? So whatever the case is, you're still doing the same thing. You're reporting to those executives, but at the same time, I have to come back and report to my developers, right? And in between the executives and the developers is the consumers that you're trying to get value from. And so if one of the things that we all do in ServiceNow, these are probably the ones that we're all running already, whether we're running them like this or not, but you have an asset manager that's there trying to say that I want to manage all of the IT assets, right? So I want to maintain all the records for all the hardware, all the software, all the business applications, and take that and put it together, right? Don't think of every ServiceNow product I have to implement with every feature in every product, right? But my main job is to keep that master data record up to date, whether that's getting some information from SCCM, getting a little information from Tenable, putting that information together, right? I'm going to get that most accurate record, and everybody's going to come to me for records instead of using their spreadsheets, right? And I'm going to rationalize all that data from all those different systems so that I have the most up-to-date asset record in the company. And then I'm going to serve these different consumers that need that data. And so I go into some customers, and there's 7 to even 10 different systems of records for assets. So the idea behind me owning this product is that if the ops team needs asset records so that they can put the assets in the incidents, they come to me. If the cyber team needs an asset record so that they can go ahead and say, this is the security event on that product, they come to me, right? So that's the idea of this asset manager. That's how I'm adding value, is I'm stopping all this duplicate work of everybody tracking assets, right? They come to me, I'm the one-stop shop for assets. The same thing with the ops center that we talked about before, and Dan mentioned this a little bit. So if we're a service desk, right? I'm the owner of this service desk product. And again, I'll go into a lot of organizations and they'll have 30 or 40 service desks. Every department has their own IT service desk. And then they sometimes map to that main service desk, right? So why is everybody redoing their service desk, right? Why is all these people? So if I'm the product manager of a service desk, I'm providing that to the main IT organization, but I'm also able to extend that and saying, look, I can provide this service desk product to you, right? So that we're not redoing things. And then the same thing with the ServiceNow platform, right? This is where that platform team, we don't want the platform team saying, oh, I'm running all incident, problem, change. No, my job is to maintain the platform so that you can run operations on it, or you can run asset management on it, or you can run HR on it, or you can run cyber on it, right? I'm just going to keep that platform alive, and I'm going to give you core things as somebody running a service on my platform. I'm going to make sure all the integrations that you need are maintained. So for HR, I might be hooking into Workday or PeopleSoft. I'm going to make sure that all your user interfaces are there for both your end users so they can come into a portal, but also for your agents that are working on requests or tickets coming in for those services. Right? So if you divide things up like this and they make sense, right? They have to make sense to the business. Like I'm not going to the business saying, hey, we bought hardware asset management service now. It costs us this amount of money, and here's the value we're getting out of it. Right? It's too granular. You'll be sitting there with the executives and they're going to gloss over. Right? But if you have a handful, you group all the product now, and a lot of these things aren't just product now, right? Like on the platform, it's not just ServiceNow, it's ServiceNow, but it's also going to be all your security tools you're hooking into. It's going to be your Tenables and your Rapid7s, and it's also going to be all of the operational tools like SCCM or Intune that you're hooking into, right? So that's what you need to run services, right? So there's core things that you can give that everybody doesn't have to be doing those on every team, right? So those, if we take a look at that IT asset manager now, let's figure everybody kind of put themselves in this picture where I am an IT asset manager and I'm charged with, I'm going to go to management. I'm going to make this pitch for letting me manage all the IT assets in our entire organization. not only manage IT assets for the IT team, but all the other departments too. I'm going to go out and tell all the other departments, stop using your asset management and come use mine. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is you realize you need this capability, right? And if you do need that capability, you say, okay, how do I build the asset management product? And you just say, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to build it myself. I'm going to go out and buy some stuff, right? I'm going to buy some things from ServiceNow. I'm going to buy hardware asset management, software asset management, and even APM, so I can use manage applications. Right, so once you buy those things, you need to say, how am I going to run it? Right, so we already have ServiceNow. I'm going to use the ServiceNow platform and run those on top of it. So when I go to that ServiceNow platform owner, on the bottom, they're already running ServiceNow, and there's certain things that come with me using that product to run my hardware, software, right? I get certain things for free. I don't have to hook up the single sign-on because we already have single sign-on connected. I don't have to do certain other things because I don't have to manage my integrations to get hardware information in, because I'm going to put that on that platform team. I'm going to tell them, hey, I need an integration to SCCM to get hardware information. I need an integration to PeopleSoft to get my application portfolio. Whatever those are, you feed those requirements into that application team, and they're able to get that platform team is able to get those integrations set up. And then you'll pay a fee to that application platform for maintaining those integrations for you. Now, ideally, some people already have those integrations because maybe the SecOps team is using that, and you could just piggyback off it and you say, okay, I'm getting data on this asset record, right? So there's all different ways that you get real good scale in here because you're leveraging that team to provide a lot of what you need, and you don't have to do all that foundational work. Okay, now here you might have different platforms. Like I might say, if I call in and there's one ServiceNow team and all of my hardware asset management questions or all of my escalations, then you might just have one application service. But in this case, I have a special team of people that just handle hardware asset management questions. So I need another application service. So I treat those as different systems because there's a different support structure or a different service level. So that's one way to represent it, where I can have two, but I don't need one for APM, because for APM, I just get that out of the core, right? The core team answers APM questions. So this is where you're determining a lot of that setup, and that's how the organization might be set up. Now, at the end here, you want to provide certain things, right? I want to provide that asset management capability. So what I can do here is I can say, now I'm going to have my offerings. Right? So I'm going to let people retire hardware, request software, even do compliance reporting on their hardware, their software, and their applications. Right? So these are where your offerings map up all the way through into the portfolio. Now, one of the things I'll leave you with, because we're out of time today, and I'll pick up on this next time, because we're going to, in our next session, we're going to talk about the year in review, but I can kind of finish up on this. The next part of this is where these product models come in, right? So a lot of things will either be converted to product models past CSDM 4, and this is where the product management comes in. So there might be a product manager for software, for hardware, and there might be a product manager for portfolio. There might be a product manager for IT asset management that's selling this back to the business. Now, one of the things we can do with the STLC components is stratify those things, right? And that's where it comes in, and we say, look, we have our one big product model called Acme IT Asset Management, and I'm going to hook into all these things. So all these things are going to reference me, and I'm going to tie them all together. And when I go report back to the business, or I go and drop these in an agile queue, drop requests into for the next version of this, I'll be doing it here. I'm not going to be doing it each of these. I'm not going to have different queues for all these requests, for all these things. I'm going to have one big model that stratifies all that and brings it together so that I can manage my costs there, and I can also manage my requirements there. All right, we're right at the top of the hour. So I do have a couple more slides, and I said I'll pick up on this next meeting and I'll finish it off with some additional slides, but I will put these slides in there. And at the end of this, I just want to show you, there's a couple references if you do want more, like how CSDM maps to CSDM maps back to IT for IT, or this is the publication on the new standard for IT for IT. Really good read, especially going through and seeing a couple of things that Dan talked about in there. There's a bunch of links here to Mark's material on the CSDM and mapping to IT for IT. And then this is a really good one from Matt and Scott, or Mark and Scott rather, where they talk about the life cycle parts of those. So we are a minute over. Thanks everybody much for your time. And I will, like I said, I'll pick up on this next meeting and we can cover the second half of this. So Dan, thanks again for presenting. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. And if there are any questions.
Can I just say in response to Mitch?
Yep.
There is a paper about how IT for IT maps to ITIL, and I will dig that up and send it to you to add to the forum.
Hey Dan, I'll put that in this page so all the references are in one spot.
All right. Good.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks everybody.